thank yous later on, but first of all, I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to indulge in this moment. But I thought I would say a few things. A couple of people, Andy has already asked me some question about, there he is, how did I record the stuff and things like that, the ideas for the book, things like that. Well, I've always loved writing, which may come as no surprise. I think it's always been the physical act of writing. And indeed, part of the illegibility of my writing, that some of you might know about, is partly because I enjoy playing with unusual fonts. And I'm rather proud to say that Evelyn Waugh, I read a lot of his books in my teenage years. I don't know how much I understood, but that particular series had a very elaborate font. And I adopted some of those letters, which results in people occasionally saying to me, "You ought to be a doctor," you know? Which, of course, I point out various other skills are needed. But so I've always loved writing, and indeed I'm very grateful to actually quite a few teachers who encouraged and nurtured my early talent. And I can think of 4 instances quite strongly. I had a biology teacher when I was doing A-level who came into the class one day and he said, to the bafflement of my scholarly colleagues, he was now going to give us 2 marks, one for our biology essay and the other one for our writing style. Well, this was very good news to me because my shoulders went up several inches and I now felt on a par with my very bright, he was an Asian boy next to me. So I thank that Stephen. I can't remember his second name at the moment. I didn't do English to A-level, but I did the most scholarly English teacher I had when I was up to about 13. My sister Vicky will remember Robert Avery, very learned man, studious. I still remember some of the essays I did for him. And my mother and I and our other sister were throwing out our old school reports about 2 years ago in her garden. And there wasn't much worth keeping in my reports. But there was a quote from Robert Avery, who said that whatever Robert decided to do, this Robert, in his future life, his writing would always stand him in good stead. So I dropped a card to Robert Avery, who sadly died actually about 6 months after that. And a colleague of his is also in my memory, Johnny Osborne, who one of my early delights in my life, I'm afraid to say, was actually giving up Latin. And which may come as a bit of a surprise to you, as someone who likes language and words. But it wasn't helped by the fact that my last Latin teacher was someone called Dickie West, who I knew had beaten 50 boys in one sitting. And that was only for snowballing. So I knew my Latin wasn't going to get very far, so I was quite keen to get as far away from him as I could. But the point of that was that it enabled me to choose, when I'm giving up Latin, a minor subject. So we were allowed, as well as choosing our A-levels, we were allowed to choose minor subjects. I had 3 classes a week, and of course what did I choose? Writer's Workshop. And Johnny Osborne, who I wrote to recently to thank him, who's still alive, encouraged us, and we produced a book of, a brochure. We sold it to parents on prize day and things like that. And I went on to win the Poetry Prize at Marlborough. So I'm very grateful for all those teachers who've nurtured my early talent. And one other thing I'd say about my early life, that was all a long time ago. How did we get here? I would say, I think when I was a teenager, my parents were in Germany, and I didn't speak much German, and I felt a bit removed. And my lifeline to British culture was the newspaper, which of course in those days arrived at lunchtime after being transported by a plane. Can you imagine it? So, and that was my lifeline. And actually sitting down on the floor, poring over the Times, as it then, the prestigious days of the Times, and getting beyond the sports pages was something really. And the next time we were in Germany, I think there were a few other British people around us who had careers, and I decided I'm not sure I was going to do my father's career, were journalists. And I suddenly thought, there's something I like. I like words, I like foreign life and things like that. So that's how it all sort of came about. I wrote a blog this morning, which has already been tweeted and retweeted and favorited, and it says that writing a book, there's a reason for that, the tongue. Writing a book is a bit like having a baby. Mothers, please bear with me. The rest of you hear me out. First of all, you keep a little quiet about it. You're not sure about, you're going to tell anyone, is it safe? You tell your close friends, but then gradually word, of course, gets out, and you have to start answering questions. What's it going to be called, and how long it's going to be, and things like that. As D-Day approaches, you get a lot of worry. You think, God, is this really any good at all? Will anyone read it? Will it sell? And all those sort of questions. And I also suggest you get quite... you get quite immobilised. Pam, my neighbour Pam, knows, where is she? How many hours I spend at my keyboard. She's always saying, passing me my ivory tower up there. So you get rather immobilised and I would say even depressed, because you're doing so little other stuff and you're working with the same text again and again. And I feel now just a bit, although excited, also a bit exhausted. I remember a good friend of mine, Helen, and having her, when I went to visit her, had her son. I went to visit her after she'd had her son, Freddie, and talking with her husband at the door, and she popped her head out of the window and she said, Robert, never again. And that's a bit like how I feel now. But then the moment comes, your baby is born, your book is This Is My Baby, and it really is rather special. And although I've seen the cover many times before, I've seen the insides, something about holding it in your hand is a fairly priceless moment. In fact, I even remember when this baby of mine was conceived. I blame a woman rally driver. I went to a talk in Chalgrove, as you do, and she showed us a video of her going 100 miles an hour around a rally track, and encouraged us all to set our vision high and reach for the skies and push ourselves out of our comfort zone. Apologies to her because her name initially escapes my memory. And I came home and I drew up this plan, and I decided I was going to write a book that summer, and I started last August. Unlike other Oxford books, for John Crabtree here, a cousin of mine, writes erudite books on macroeconomics in South America. I'm afraid mine is a lighter tone, nor is it sort of necessarily a literary work. My goal was to choose a book and to write it a subject that I could finish as quick as possible. Which may sound strange, but Rob Walters and I went to hear Matthew Engel on Friday, and he said, of course, an aim of any writer is to get a book finished. So I feel actually that was perhaps quite a good steer of mine to choose a subject that I could write as quick as possible. In fact, this book even has a father, because he isn't here today, but he's in the acknowledgements. Tom Hardy of Tom Hardy Publishing gave me lots of useful ideas of additional content that I put in. And if you doubt all of that, you should have worked out that the end of May, the end of February, is 9 months. And first books are always late, so I feel justified. Just a few final things. Will this baby change my life? Well, I feel I can share now some of the comments that some of you perhaps heard. You hear writers, established writers, especially novelists, quite often say, well, actually they started writing in their teens and 20s, wrote a novel and then they did that. But also they say things like, gosh, what on earth's in that chapter? Or they get a question from a reader and say, which book is that person talking about? And I feel a bit like this. I pick this book up and think, God, what's in that chapter? I can't possibly remember. I'll no longer feel a fraud, because I used to advertise myself as a book coach, and that's why I'm proudly writing this badge, because it now says writer. I've had this badge for a long time. For a while I felt a bit of a fraud, but now I feel I can be book coach. So I hope it's going to... oh yes, one other thing, before I come to the thank yous. And of course, my friend Helen, who I told you said never again. You may have guessed that she went on to have 3 more children. So there may be life in this pen yet. So last, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I've said already thank you to the gallery, but to repeat my thanks to the gallery. If you want to keep in touch with what they're doing here, there's a visitor's book just next to my books here by Isabel there. Put your name down and Jenny will keep you on the mailing list for events here. I should say that the book is dedicated to Oxfordshire County Council libraries. I've always been I know a bit out of fashion, but I've always been a fan of libraries, and I've used their resources a lot, not to write this book, but just to read fiction and place to work and computers and scans. And as well as Tom Hardy and some of the other people, well, Fakenham Pre-Press did the inside, for whom I've done a lot of editing and proofreading. And we have here Nikki Shields, who did the cover, so you can know where to go for good covers, and she did 2 of my leaflets are there. She did those as well. And Sophie is somewhere, who is the daughter of a good friend of mine, Sophie Collins, did the proofreading. And I've said to Sophie already that she did it at a slightly earlier stage, since when I've added a bit of content. So if you find any errors, they are mine and not Sophie's. And I would still recommend her as a proofreader. I think that's all. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy your hobbies, as I have done mine. Thank you all for coming. And now I can actually really relax, because I should say that I should also thank Brenda, who's on the committee of Writers in Oxford with me. And the only other reason that we're here, as well as Jenny, the gallery owner, is that Brenda's kindly come to lock up. So I won't have to worry about what we do next. So, but we've got it for another while, as long as we can tempt Brenda to stay.
Oh yes, please.
Half an hour, 20 minutes. So thank you all very much. Enjoy.
And I think we should say congratulations.
Many more babies.